Today's episode of Darkness Radio is brought to you by Microdose. Get out of pain, get out of anxiety, and start treating yourself a little bit better. Try Microdose. Microdose is a CBD THC gummy that will get you out of pain, get you out of anxiety, and get you into feeling good again. To learn more about microdosing THC, go to microdose.com and use the code DARKNESS to get free shipping and 30% off your first order. Links can be found in the show description, but again, that's microdose.com, code DARKNESS. Welcome into the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm Tim Dennis. Got a very interesting show for you today, folks. Actually, I've got quite the show for you today, as we are going to explore a little bit into some Civil War lore. Put it that way. I almost said warlord, but it's war lore today. And we're going to get into some ghost stories. Not just ghost stories. We might deal with some demons. We'll get into some witches. We'll get into some UFOs. We'll do some stuff like that. You know, it's very rare that I bring on someone who does another podcast. You may ask, well, why is that, Tim? I put it kind of akin to this. You can sit in front of a mirror and you can talk back and forth to yourself all day long. You can talk about different experiences and talk to different hosts. And I'm not saying this in a derogatory term, but other podcast hosts can be interesting, and we can talk to each other about different things. But I want to talk to people who are out in the field and doing things. And I believe I found a podcast host that's not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. And I want to talk to somebody who's really doing interesting things out there. And I found somebody who's doing interesting things out there. Shane Cashman is the host of the paranormal podcast, Tales from the Inverted World. And if it's not already on your radar, Tales from the Inverted World investigates the mysteries that lie beneath the surface of everyday life. Shane is out there searching for answers concerning UFO encounters, cryptids, ghosts, interdimensional beings, secret government experiments, and more. And in the most recent episodes, Shane's been traveling to the South, where he's been investigating the ghosts of the Civil War. Richmond burns at the end of the Civil War as the Confederate gold evades capture, and Shane meets a woman in Washington, Georgia, which we're going to talk about today, who claims to speak to the dead. And I've seen, keep in mind, seen, because there are episodes that are up right now, and we'll give you the link to that. Actually, the link is in the description of the show here. And it's beautiful, by the way. If you go to Timcast, which is the website, you can actually see, because there's illustrated arts, there's sound effects, and there's narration where you can see some of the episode, and it's beautifully done. And you can get a feel for what it is that Shane's been through down in Washington, Georgia. You can see everything that Shane's been through, and it will give you chills. You'll get chills up your spine as to some of the adventures that Shane's been through there in Washington, Georgia. To give you a little bit about who Shane is and what Shane's been through, Shane Cashman is an accomplished writer. His stories have appeared in The Atlantic, BBC Travel, Atlas Obscura, Penthouse, Catapult, Narratively, Vice Salon, the Los Angeles Review of Books blog, Jellyfish Review, Monkey Bicycle, The Observer, Volume 1, Brooklyn, Fiction Southeast, The Common, and elsewhere. In 2015, he received first place in the Penn Center USA 500-word short story contest. He's a Glimmer Train short fiction finalist. His nonfiction has been featured as an editor's pick at longreads.com. Shane teaches narrative studies at Manhattanville College in Purchase, New York, and he's currently located in West Virginia. Let's bring him in right now to Darkness Radio. Welcome, Shane Cashman. Appreciate you being with us.
Hey, Tim. It's a pleasure being here. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you again for being here. Let's start out slow, because there's a literal fire hose to drink here from today to talk about what it is you've been researching down south having to do with the Civil War. Let's start out slow. I want to explain to people, first of all, because you've got a very creative title for your podcast, if you will. And it's called Tales from the Inverted World. Explain to us, Shane, what is the inverted world? What are we talking about when we talk about that?
Yeah, I guess the older I get, the more I become more observant of things. Mm-hmm. I just see that there's a world that's hidden that people aren't paying attention to. It's like when you walk through a city and no one's looking up and there's all these beautiful things. They're just looking at the sky and the country. And the inverted world is all these things that are taking place in the periphery, whether it's encounters people have that they don't want to talk about, or it's weird government experiments like the ones you mentioned, such as Operation Northwoods, or things that happen in Tuskegee that happen in a world that's this world, but so many people aren't paying attention, where they're kind of just, ignorant to all these things that are happening. So the inverted world is actually this world. It's just when you learn about it all, it feels like you're upside down.
It's a great way of putting it, and you feel when you start getting hit with things. We start in a world of innocence, don't we? We start with a world where we trust. We start in a world where I guess we wander around and we think that we're protected. And then as the layers of the onion unpeel, we find out that we're not as protected as we thought, and we're not as looked after as we thought. Right. Yeah.
And it should be that. It should be that way. And in my case, I feel like I had a lot of weird fears growing up. I was deep in the woods in the country, up in like quote unquote upstate New York, an hour north of New York City. Mm-hmm. And when you grow up in the woods, at least for me, and you have no neighbors, the nighttime becomes populated with a lot of things that may or may not exist. But then as I grew older, maybe some of those things are real. I don't know. But I meet people who had the same fears. And I'm just interested in hearing those stories. Whether or not I can confirm them yet, I'd love to be able to confirm certain things. But the fears that really take over people's minds, they shape your perception of the world. And I think maybe the inverted world is different for everybody because our perceptions are so wildly different, and how we grow up and all these things, where we grew up. So, but yeah, that for me those are really interesting things. The stories behind, why people think certain things or fear certain things.
Well, in upstate New York, as you're growing up, do you tend to run into the things that maybe we don't? I mean, I'll give you an idea. As a kid, I come home to Northeast Minneapolis as a city kid, but then we eventually go out to what was known at the time as the suburbs of Minneapolis. And then we go a little bit further out. We're not quite in the country, but we're out there a ways. But never did I run into what I would consider a UFO, or never did I see what people would consider Bigfoot or anything like that. But I did have my dream visitations from relatives, and I did have the things that people would consider, I guess, ghost visitations, and I had an out-of-body experience. What things did you run into as far as the supernatural goes that kind of started to shock you into this inverted world of sorts?
So I grew up rather nonchalantly with a ghost in our house. My dad always said our ghosts in this house are blue collar ghosts. They work just as hard as you and I, and we just share a space. The house was built in the 1700s. It's an old stone house in the middle of nowhere that J.P. Morgan used to own.
Oh, wow.
And then when he died, his daughter took it over. And at that point, it was like a cow farm, and she had accidentally killed all the cows because she was letting them stand on cement inside, and I guess they got cold. So the story goes, and the cows just started dying off because they weren't being taken care of properly. So the story goes.
Wow.
So when that failed, the United States Military Academy bought it for training. I believe that was maybe, I forget, I want to say the Korean War, but I could be off, because it's got all these great woods where they would train. So anyway, many, many years later in the 80s, I moved there with my family when I was 1 from Queens, New York. Mm-hmm. And that's when my parents immediately started saying there's a ghost here. But it was always, like I said, nonchalant. I just grew up never fearing ghosts. We just always they were part of the family. So the ghost thing was the first real supernatural thing, because we always would see, you remember back in the day, those old giant, like a Magnavox TV, if you had it on like the channel 3 or something, it would just be like the fuzz, the static, but you could hear it, but you couldn't hear it.
Yeah. Yep.
That feeling happened all the time, but the TV was really not on, right? So you'd feel like this thing in your molars, and you're like, what is that sound? And it was just a sensation. You know, there was a military base nearby, so keep that in mind. But things like that would happen. Things would move. Your typical, the lights on and off and sounds. But when it got weird was when I was probably in high school. Someone told us that a boy had been murdered in that house a few years before we moved in. And we were like, oh, that must be the ghost. And so we learned that his name might be Jimmy. And this is a story I tell in the first book for Inverted World. But Jimmy means a lot to me. And he's my first encounter with what might be the supernatural. So I investigated the story because it turned out Jimmy, people were telling me he might be real, might be a myth. And I looked into it. He was unfortunately and it's weird that I'm telling this story. Are you wearing a Super Bowl shirt right now? A Super Bowl sweater?
I'm actually wearing, a Super Bowl champion, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. A few of the guys from the U of M Minnesota Gophers team ended up on Tampa Bay Buccaneers, yeah. Sick.
So unfortunately on Super Bowl Sunday, I believe it was 76 or 79, the Dolphins are playing the Redskins. So someone out there can go look that up. But Jimmy's parents were out, and Jimmy was home alone with his older brother. And his older brother and his friend decided to play a prank on Jimmy. So they got their dad's gun, his rifle, and pulled the trigger on Jimmy and accidentally killed him.
Oh, my God.
That was terrible. So I found like the initial articles to this because this had been covered up because it was on a military base. And the military police have no, record of this. And you can't find anything except for like the first 2 initial articles about a boy being shot. But all that aside, it was like once we started talking to Jimmy, we either manifested Jimmy or what maybe we were imagining it, but things would start to get weirder with Jimmy in terms of sounds and the doors slamming shut, but never like in a way where I felt afraid. I was just like, oh yeah, I guess this is how we communicate now. But I found out that I grew up in his room, right? Like my bedroom as a kid was Jimmy's bedroom. And I felt like he was maybe living vicariously through me. So that's my like ghost thing. And I'm sure there's more ghosts considering how old the place is. And the property was used as a Vietnam rehabilitation place for wounded vets when they came back from the war. If they were missing a limb or had some kind of, PTSD, they would work on a farm. They'd build rock walls. And so there's a lot of weird energy there with all that stuff going on. Plus, UFOs are a big thing in New York, and especially in my area. So, that's something we heard about all the time. And I forget what big event it was, what the name was, but there was an event in the early 80s. This is before I was born. And everyone in like the tri-state area, like Connecticut, New York City, and New Jersey, and where we are in the Hudson Valley, New York, they saw this giant, I think it was a triangle, shaped UFO just gliding over the Hudson River. And I talked to a lot of people who are either reluctant to talk about it because it just sounds crazy to them, or people who saw it, but, they write it off as, some type of prank or the military because they're the military and there's an Air Force base nearby. The UFO things are things that happen all the time. But the things we didn't get were like, I never really got into like the cryptid things. In New York, at least in my area, no one was talking about cryptids all that much. So we didn't get that stuff. But the ghosts and UFOs are the 2 of the bigger things in that area, for sure.
So no talk of Jersey Devil or anything like that in your area?
I heard about it, but it wasn't like a thing that we thought about. There was another thing, actually, these feral children that everyone said lived in our woods because actually in the story I wrote for Atlas Obscura, it's about an abandoned town on a mountain, and it's called Doodletown. And the state of New York kicked everyone out, eminent domain. Okay. So they wanted it for a ski slope that they never built. So they kicked out everyone from this community on a mountain that had been there since a year or 2 before the revolution.
Okay.
And so like everyone's descendants were there. But anyway, when they're all kicked out, people said, I forget the name of the kids, but there's some feral boys. They're living in the woods, because kind of like some Hills Have Eyes type creature, mutants. But I didn't really fear them. I just felt like they might be friends if we ever ran into each other in the woods.
Yeah,
at least my problems.
Well, you would think. I mean, anytime you run across some guys in the woods that are your age, you would think you'd just get along with them. You wouldn't, necessarily they wouldn't be a danger.
No, let's go explore.
Yeah, exactly. Let's hang out. Let's go dig up some stuff. It wouldn't.
That's it.
Wouldn't necessarily be a danger. That's for sure. Well, that's interesting. I mean, you know what? All we were doing in my neck of the woods is we were playing in dirt piles that we thought were dirt piles. It turns out they were huge piles of manure. We didn't know that. So, yeah.
Hey, that's awesome. We had that too. Don't get me wrong. We definitely had that too.
So we were rolling in shit and didn't know it. That was
Makes you stronger.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it grows hair on your chest. That's what we were told. Little did we know it was probably a cancer risk, and now we won't find out until we're older.
Right.
So I have to ask you. So okay, so you get to the point now where this has kind of tickled your fancy. It's gotten into your lexicon, so to speak. When does this really become an interest for you? When does the paranormal and the supernatural really creep into your fabric, so to speak, where you decide that you want to start pursuing it or do something more with it than it's just a passing fancy?
Oh man. So I remember this very clearly. I didn't really know what a writer was. I understood that there was writing and people wrote, but I didn't really understand that a human did it. And I remember I must have been in like 5th or 6th grade. And I went to the West Point Elementary School, which is on that military base. But I'm a civilian. My parents were civilians. They just coach horse riding. So I was allowed to go to base. It was a cool experience. So anyway, I'm sitting in the theater for this presentation, and they have an impersonator who's going to come perform on stage for all of us. And it happened to be Edgar Allan Poe. And I was blown away. Because, Edgar Allan Poe was a cadet at the academy, and he got kicked out for being just crazy, raucous and all that stuff. So they had this guy come in, and I see this man just ranting and raving about like dark stuff and skulls, ravens. And he was like, he was mad. He was like drunk on just the weirdest stuff. And I was like, I want to be that guy. So I remember just being like obsessed with Poe after that. Well, his writing, Yeah. Can't say too much about him as a person, although I'm fascinated with his life and his mysterious death. Yeah, and his afterlife, because his tombstone is amazing, has his own amazing history. But
right,
that was it. That was it. I saw this guy. I was like, wait, you could just tell stories? That's amazing. And I didn't realize it would be 30 years of suffering to tell stories as a career, but it was worth it. It was worth it. And I think of Poe quite often because those early Poe stories meant everything to me because they were like insights into the dark world. And I think I started like absorbing that, in like 5th or 6th grade. It was crucial to me.
It's interesting, Shane, and now that you say it, you can draw the parallel when you actually go to the Timcast website and you watch the videos, the Tales from the Inverted World videos. You really can see the Poe influence there. And
awesome.
I don't know if,
Thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. And it's not just the storytelling there and in the narration that's there, but it's also the influence of the art, the sound effects, the music, everything. I mean, it does have that dark, chilling feel when you go to watch the video and the storytelling in itself, even the way that the story is set.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Have you ever got out to Poe's gravesite or gone that far as to I guess kind of? You have.
I have. Yeah. I was one of my first paid writing jobs was to cover a tattoo convention in Baltimore. And so at the time I was managing a tattoo shop. So my best friend was a shop in New York, Graceland Tattoo. And we booked this event down in Baltimore. So I was like, I'm going to write about Poe tattoos. Because people are definitely getting Poe tattoos, and I knew someone I was going with is also getting one. So I got to write a little thing about Poe and his gravestone. And while I was there, I took a walk over, and people had left roses because I think they always do, and it was incredible. It's an amazing tombstone. I believe the original one was a freight train drove through it by accident. So it was obliterated. So it's, I'm not looking at the original one, but it was incredible. I loved seeing it. And somewhere I have pictures of me at the grave. It was cool to pay my respects.
Yeah, most definitely. You didn't get a Poe tattoo, did you?
Not yet. I'm surprised. Surprised. Of all the ones I have, I still don't have one.
Really?
But maybe soon.
Would you go to that tattoo shop to get it?
No, probably not.
No.
Well, you know what? I do have a really good friend. My friend Hunter does tattoo in Baltimore, and he might be the one to do it. Maybe we'll do it at Poe's grave.
Oh.
That's what I'll do. Oh. That's what I'll do. You might like this story, actually. Hunter, his name's Hunter Spanks, and he tattoos in Baltimore. He was on the Queen Mary for another tattoo thing.
Okay.
And they all decided to tattoo in the dark and try to have a freaking seance to raise the dead. And because the Queen Mary supposedly has all these things.
Yeah.
I don't think anything happened because I think they might have had a little too much to drink.
Okay.
But they said maybe they wrote something. But I think if I go to Poe's grave, I have a better chance. So I'll have to get back to you about that.
I think so too. Yeah. Interestingly, what part of the Queen Mary? Do you remember what part of the Queen Mary they were trying to raise something on?
I wish I could say. I wish I could ask him right now, but I don't remember.
Okay. Yeah, it'd be interesting to find out. I mean, whether it be in the first class pool or if they were, no matter where they were at the time, they were in
one of the rooms. I know that much, and the lights were all out, but I don't know which part.
I've told it here on the show before, but I had an interesting experience on the Queen Mary where I'm having a laugh fit with Dave, who was on the show with me here at one time, and we're having a giggle fit at 3:30 in the morning, not able to go to sleep, and at that point I have my glasses off. Okay, but I'm looking up at the ceiling and we're telling jokes back and forth, and he's in one bed, I'm in another. He's trying to roll over and go to sleep, and I can't get to sleep. And you know how you're on a roll and you just keep telling jokes?
Oh yeah.
Well, I just keep telling jokes, and just then I see this reddish orb pop up over his bed, and it's kind of floating around on the ceiling. Well, I grab my glasses, I put them on real quick, and there's this red orb floating around.
Mm-hmm.
And I go,
how long did it last?
Oh, not very long at all, maybe 30 seconds. And I'm like, wow. I'm like, D, turn over. You got to see this. He's like, whatever, just shut the F up and go to sleep. I'm like, no, you got to see this. You got to see this. And here's this red orb, and it just shot off and went through the door and out into the hallway.
Those orbs are wacky.
Oh my God. I was like, whoa, because I don't see stuff like that. So.
Yeah, I actually saw one once too. I was in the back seat in high school with three friends right outside their house, about to go to see a movie or something. And the window had opened on the right side. So my friend all the way to the right, and an orb just went slowly by all three of us and then just left. And then it got really quiet. Like no one was like, oh man, there's an orb. Everyone just watched it. I remember seeing it. It left. Then it got silent. And then everyone was like, did you see that? Like, we were like, holy crap. It was the most bizarre thing. Just right like that. And it just disappeared. Yeah. I don't know what it was. Yeah. It was cool.
And
pretty cool.
It's not like moisture or a bug or anything you'd see on a camera. This is like a red floating, like visual orb with a tail on it. I mean, it was
like an energy.
Yes, it was an energy ball. Yeah, it was
it was unbelievable. Yeah. It was unbelievable. I'll never forget it. I could still clearly see it just drifting right by all of us. Like it wanted us to see it. You know? And then it was gone. It was gone.
Yeah.
That's cool. You had that experience in the Queen Mary.
Yeah. It was. I still don't know how to describe it. And every time you say the word orb, of course, most investigators roll their eyes and go, "Oh yeah, it was an orb." Blah, 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 blah. But no, you're right. I don't have any other word to describe it other than an energy ball.
Yep. I've just learned to not discount anybody's story, even though we could all easily be like, "Oh, it's this or that." You weren't there. All these things, and sometimes people just have an experience. And I can't explain it away as much as I want to, because I am also a skeptic of things. It's like I don't just go out there like a exposed nerve and absorb it all and believe everything. But like the stuff like that, and since I've had the experience with the orb now, then I can't discount others,
Right.
immediately. Even if my gut says I should, right? I'm like, I should, it's all BS, but I don't think it can be. It can't all be BS because you hear it too often from different people.
Very true. Very true. Yeah, it's you're right. It's hard, when you're a skeptic at heart and you know that you've gone into situations before, you've seen things a million times, and a lot of times you can explain some stuff away. It's hard when you haven't experienced yourself and you go, you know what, I think I can explain that. And then you go to explain it and there's no explanation and you go, oh, be damned.
Right. And like on the flip side of that conversation, and this is something I wrote about in the first Inverted World book as well, is like the first time I thought I saw a real UFO. I remember driving down this back road in New York and by the Hudson River where I was just telling you other people had seen UFOs. And we saw this giant triangle above the mountain, and it was blinking, a blue light blinking at each point of the triangle. Mm-hmm. I remember stopping, and I saw it through the sunroof. I'm like, I had my girlfriend at the time, her Volvo. I was like, holy crap, that's a UFO. And I just stopped. I was like paralyzed by I was awestruck. And then I just sped off. And I was on a road where you either had to go back home, I had to turn around and face the thing again, or drive like 30 minutes out of my way. So I turned around and went back. And it was foggy, of course. Like it sounds cliche, but it was driving through. I'm like, it's still there. I'm driving through, and it's swishing sides. And it's this really windy road. And then I get back, and it's blinking. I'm like, okay, I'm freaked out. I sped off. I went to pick up my two little sisters. I went to pick up my sisters at a party they were at, and I'm like, I run in there like Kramer from Seinfeld. I slide to the door. I'm like, I just saw a UFO. I'm like, everybody stop what they're doing. We got to look out the window. It's just past the river. And I turn everyone into a believer. I tell my father, who's like looking at me like he's lost his son, basically. I'm like, Dad, I swear. And I gather a friend the next night. It's still foggy. I'm like, we got to go look for the UFO. And by golly, it's still there. So we drive by it. My friend starts freaking out. And you got to imagine this. This is like a guy who looks kind of like Rambo, but covered in tattoos, like face tattoos, right?
Right.
Giant beard. And he's like, no, get out of here. So we go back, but we like, dude, we got to go back and see. I need a picture because no one's going to believe us. And at the time, I probably had like a stupid flip phone. We drive back. We park beneath the mountain and the fog clears and it's a freaking cell phone tower. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, this whole time, it's just been a cell phone tower blinking. And I should have known that. I've driven by the cell phone tower. But I was like, that I felt like I believed so much in 24 hours in that UFO. We're like, so the flip side of that other conversation is because I saw the orb, even though I can't explain it, just because I saw a UFO and I could explain that away, I know how physical a belief can be after an experience. So I keep both those things in my mind at both times when I'm listening to all the stories I'm hearing. I want to explain it away, but I also really want to believe.
Exactly. And sometimes you get that adrenaline shot and logic goes out the window. I get it. And you have to get to that point where you settle down and I get it. I totally get it. I tell you what, at this point, why don't we take a quick break? When we come back, let's get into Tales from the Inverted World, and we'll talk a little bit about Washington, Georgia, and what drew you to Washington, Georgia, and tales of the Civil War down there. And there's a very interesting tale behind it, and it starts with gold, and it spins off a little bit out of control from there, Shane. But we'll get into it when we get back. It's a very intriguing tale, folks. And I'm telling you, there's a lot of intriguing stuff there. There's actually a book here too, as well, that we want you to check out. It's called Tales from the Inverted World, Ghosts of the Civil War. Now, Shane, there's a website where people can get this book. Why don't you tell people where they can get the book, first of all?
So right now we're writing volume 2, which is what you're talking about, Ghosts of the Civil War. And that is at timcast.com. We're a Timcast exclusive. We have 2 episodes for free on YouTube and Apple and Spotify right now from Ghosts of the Civil War. So you can check those out. The rest of the season's being serialized on timcast.com. And then once that's done being serialized, which is going to be, I think, mid-September, the book will be released. And that'll be available through Timcast, also on Amazon and a bunch of different platforms for ebooks and whatnot. But yeah, but we also have the first book available as well, and that's at invertedworldbook.com, and that is for volume 1. And you can hear me talk about some of the stories I just told you guys about.
Okay, so invertedworldbook.com if you want to check out the book, the first book, that is. Also, you can check out Shane on Facebook at Tales from the Inverted World. He's on Instagram and Twitter as well at Inverted Tales on Instagram and Twitter. When we come back, we'll get into Washington, Georgia, and what led Shane to check out Washington, Georgia, and Tales of the Civil War down there. But first, we've been experiencing the emotional pain of a town in Georgia in this episode. I want to tell you a little bit about physical pain. You've heard about my physical pain. You've heard about Bruiser's physical pain throughout the last few weeks here on the show. And we've also been telling you a little bit about microdosing. Now, I want to explain microdosing just for a quick moment. I've tried to explain it to you a little bit throughout the last few weeks. Microdosing is real simple. The concept of microdosing is commonly associated with psychedelics. But microdose is just this. It's just taking a smaller dose of medication to get the effect you need without getting the loginess from the medication that you would normally get. The people at Microdose Gummies are realizing that people have everyday activities that they're trying to get through, and they need to get out of pain. They need to get out of that anxiety. They need to function in everyday society. So they've come up with a brilliant product, Microdose Gummies. Microdose Gummies are a safe, reliable CBD hemp gummy that has just the right amount of THC, as it has less than the maximum allowed by federal law, less than 0.3% THC, and gives you just the right amount of pain relief or anxiety relief without getting the high. Microdose Gummies also gives you the benefits you're looking for, such as getting out of pain, getting better sleep at night, getting rid of anxiety. Also, if you're looking for a creative boost, it does that as well. If you've got a good workout plan going and you need the muscles to recover a little bit quicker, Microdose Gummies does that as well. And in case I haven't told you, Microdose Gummies are delicious. They have lots of different flavors, anything from like a Sour Patch type flavor to orange cream gummies, which is one of my favorites. There's a wild berry flavor that's kind of a strawberry blueberry flavor. Much, much more. They've got some great flavors in there as well. I've told you about my medical problems in the past. I'll just sum it up for you real quickly. Between my neck and my back, I've got 3 broken vertebrae. I've got quite a few bulging discs in my neck and back. I've got procedures that I'm going through constantly in order to try and get myself out of pain. Every day I'm dealing with pain issues. Microdose Gummies has helped me, as Bruiser has put it before, feel lubed up. Feel like I'm the Tin Man who's been had the oil can put to me many different times throughout the day. I take one in the morning and I take one at night before I go to bed, and I stay lubed up all day long. In other words, I feel like I'm free. My joints are moving. I'm not shifting in my chair. I don't have that anxiety of pain, and I don't have the excruciating pain all day long. Microdose Gummies is changing my life and changing the way I attack my day. There's certain things I wasn't doing because I was in excruciating pain. And now I'm attacking life from a whole new perspective. You know what's great is I'm getting your emails week after week about how you're going out and you're purchasing Microdose Gummies for yourself. You're going out and you're purchasing Microdose Gummies for your loved ones. They're trying this product and they're getting out of pain, and it's changing their life. And I'm so happy that you're doing that. I'm so happy that you're trying this product and that it's working for you and your loved ones. I've purchased the product myself. I've purchased it for different friends and loved ones that have needed it. And I'm so happy that it's working for them as well. I'm seeing results. Friends are seeing results. Loved ones are seeing results. And that's what this is about, folks. It's about living a better life, living a healthier life. And we can do that through Microdose Gummies. Like I said, they really do taste and feel amazing. They're helping me get out of pain. They're helping me wind down, chill out. I'm sleeping better. I'm sleeping through the night, which is a blessing in itself. And I'm able to sit here and do this podcast. Throughout the day, I'm not having to get up and move around, shift around. I'm able to sit in this chair and do this show with you, which again is another blessing. You may be saying to yourself, Tim, how do I get a hold of Microdose Gummies? It's real simple. Because Microdose Gummies have less than the maximum amount of THC allowed by federal law, that's less than 0.3% THC derived from industrial hemp, it's available to be shipped nationwide. So that means that Microdose Gummies can be shipped to your state, to your neighborhood, to your area. You want to learn more about microdosing THC? It's real simple. Go to microdose.com, use the code DARKNESS to get free shipping and 30% off your first order. The link can be found in the show description, but again, that's microdose.com and code DARKNESS. Do yourself a favor. Get out of pain. Get out of anxiety. Sleep like a baby. Get a creative boost. Enjoy the moment. Work on your workout and your recovery. Those are all the benefits you get from Microdose Gummies. Start healing yourself and treating yourself the way you should. Get yourself some Microdose Gummies now. One more time, learn about microdosing THC. Go to microdose.com. Use the code DARKNESS to get free shipping and 30% off your first order. Links are in the description of this show, but again, microdose.com. Use the code DARKNESS. Do it today. That's all coming up in just a moment right here on the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm Tim Dennis. My guest is Shane Cashman. The topic is Tales from the Inverted World. We're talking about everything from the ghosts of the Civil War to the search for lost Confederate gold. And Shane, I was teasing before the break that something very strange brought you to Washington, Georgia. Let's tell people what it was that drew you to Washington, Georgia, first of all.
Yeah, I got this very awesome and strange email from a young man named Clinton Brantley, whose family is from Washington, Georgia, since before the Revolution, actually. And he said, and at the time, I got to be honest, I'd never heard of the town. And I consider myself someone who knows a decent amount of the Civil War, but I hadn't heard of Washington, Georgia. And I didn't know too much about the lost gold, which is what he emailed me about. He was like, there's some lost gold from the Confederate gold in this town, and we're all looking for it, and it might be on my family's property. And I was immediately like, yes. So we booked a flight, and I went down there. And yeah, like you said, I went down there thinking I was going to write about one thing, the gold. I was like, well, okay, what's this gold story all about? I want to hear it. It sounds really interesting. Clint had a really interesting story with the family ties to the town. Plus, some paranormal stuff with these weird, haunted, abandoned graveyards in the woods. But like we were saying, I was talking to you earlier, within 2 hours of me visiting Washington and talking to some historians and kind of getting the feel of the town, the history, I'm at this museum right in the center of town, right across from Robert Toombs' house, who was the Secretary of State in the Civil War. He was supposed to be the president of the Confederacy, but he drank too much. And this woman comes screaming out of the museum, like she's wigged out, and she's just saying, the ghosts are too loud in there. So I was like, I immediately knew like this is gonna be more than one article, because I already was like, something else is happening in this town. I could just sense that this place was different. Everyone had a story about a ghost, even though everyone starts off the stories by saying, I don't believe in ghosts, but one kept turning on my stove, or one kept moving my chair, or one tried to burn down my house, or one is haunting my child, And I'm just like, and this is all, I'm hearing this all within my first day. So, and my first trip down there was, I think it was 3 or 4 days. And my goal was just to be like, I got an article about the gold, pretty cool story. And I remember it was, I want to say my third night there. I'm sitting with my friend Clint, and his family, who were very gracious, and they put me up in their beautiful house on this sprawling land where the old Georgia National Highway used to run right through it. And like, you really sense like Civil War, like here, in a different way than I sensed it in West Point, which is, you know, it's a different feel. And it was interesting experiencing that. But anyway, third night there, back porch, super dark out. And all of a sudden, this thing appears in the sky above the trees. And it was just this glowing, I want to say orb, but not in the orb that we were talking about.
Yeah.
This is like a thing, like a physical, like machine. UFO, even saying UFO doesn't do it justice, but it's above the tree line, and it's doing like the sign of the cross, almost like up, down, left, right. And it's a steady move. And Clint is like, oh, there it is. Like it's a friend. Like, oh, he's been waiting to see it. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, oh, I've been seeing this my whole life. I'm like, what do you mean? What is that thing? And he's like, well, I don't know. It's a UFO. And his father comes out, Harry, and Harry's like this. He's like, there it is. And we're just like, they're cracking beers now. Just like, oh yeah, there it is. I'm like, they're almost nonchalant about the UFO as I was growing up about Jimmy the Ghost. So I'm understanding the feeling, but I'm also like, that is insane, because it was a good size. It was fairly close. And if you read the book, you'll see the whole, I don't have to give the whole backstory, but there's a point where I am now looking at the UFO through an AR-15, and I'm like, cause it just shows up, and I'm at the night scope on it, and it just doesn't stop. All the night sky is happening around it. Other planes are moving. I don't know what it is. And they have no idea what it is. And they're very Baptist. And Harry was like, I remember seeing one when I was like in grade school, and I told my grandma, and he said that his grandma said, you'd be pretty foolish to think that God only created you. And so he believes in UFOs, can't explain them, or aliens rather. And so that was the night where I like kind of had a freak out. I'm like, what is this place? And mind you, I saw another UFO that same night in the same field in a different direction that did a different thing. And I did my due diligence. And if you listen to the book, I reached out to everybody I possibly could, trying to explain away these things. No one has an answer. And I'm talking meteorologists, DEA agents who were a helicopter, Air Force. Everyone says they don't, not everyone. Most people say, I don't believe in UFOs, but I don't know what that thing is. So I knew that night, as I barricaded myself in my room, about to have like an existential break, because I was just like, this place is too weird. That I was like, I messaged our CEO, and I was like, I think something weird is happening in this town. And I think I have more than an article. And then he wrote back like, maybe you have a book. And I was like, maybe I do. So I just spent like a large amount of time there. I'd travel down every few months and spend a good amount of time there, and kind of inserted myself into the town. And it had a profound impact on me, for sure. It was great.
It's going to seem like a weird question, Shane, but like here in Minnesota, we have a lot of, in different areas, we have a lot of limestone. Different areas have different makeups of the land. What in that area in Washington, Georgia, what is the makeup of the land? What's the primary stone source?
So I guess, what do they say? I want to say it right, because the way Clint says it is great. It's something like one of the purest veins of marble that runs through, or copper. I'm sorry, copper. Okay. It says copper. And there's also a giant gold mine.
Okay.
Which is funny, considering the town's known for lost gold. Meanwhile, right, there's a mine of gold, just not the lost type. Okay. So there's all of that. And the town, and this is beyond just like what is the makeup, like the chemistry of the town, of like the land, but like this town, like a lot of towns in the South, experience so much like horror, devastation, sadness, more than I think a lot of places, at least where I'm from, experienced. They all do, but like this town had one of the bloodiest battles of the Revolution and it happened to be on Valentine's Day. That's the Battle of Kettle Creek, and Sherman didn't burn it down on his march to the sea, but they believe stragglers or people posing as Sherman's people burnt down parts around it. And then the boll weevil came through and decimated everything. And it's just like perpetual fires. It's just like, it's almost like it's doomed. So yeah, people talk about ley lines, and they believe that there might be ley lines running through Washington, Georgia. And this is something we can get into a little later if you want, or now, but like sure. Just outside of town were the Georgia Guidestones. So
yeah, we will touch on that a little, especially with the stuff that's happened in recent history. We'll get into that here in a little bit, but yeah, they're right outside of town too, right?
Yeah, they were.
Yeah, past tense were.
Crazy.
And that's bizarre how they just up and were destroyed. Yeah. So the reason I ask that, and the reason why I ask what the main makeup is of the town is this. It seems so easy that you have paranormal experiences, or what we're about to find out with paranormal experiences, and then you've got just UFO showing up, or UAP showing up out of nowhere. The common, I shouldn't say common, but one of the theories that's out there is that UAP will show up and use things like gold and copper and precious metals as a fuel source.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a vein there of gold, or even, as you put it, lost Confederate gold, and they're looking to tap into like a metallurgic source, and there's copper and there's gold there, it wouldn't shock me that they're hanging out there to try and tap into that source. Now, how deep that source is, or if it's been tapped into pretty deeply, if there's even much of it remaining, or if there's still plenty of it there,
right?
Then yeah, I could see why they're showing up repeatedly.
And if I were in the UAP or UFOs, first of all, real quick, I just got to say, I have a hard time saying UAP. That Congress has like rebranded UFOs in the past few years. I'm like, I'm still not used to it, but I get it. But if I were the aliens, I'd be like, this place is, first of all, super isolated. It is filled with amazing resources. So as far as I can tell.
Yep.
I don't know if they use them or not, but they might. And also, and maybe this is the best part of it, the people here don't seem to care. Like, they just look at us and they just point and they say, oh yeah, there they are. It's not like they're out there shooting at them or all this stuff. But, these people just seem to observe these things, and they don't care.
Why is it, do you suppose, that there is such a acceptance, for lack of a better term, of such things on a grand scale, like UFOs or even ghost lore? Why is it that it's just like, oh, it just happens?
Yeah, it was that's one of the first things I asked one of the mediums I met down there, is like something about Georgia in the South, but in this town in particular, is like the dead seemed like more a part of the community than elsewhere, as did these things in the sky. And he didn't even have a good answer for it. But I think after observing them in this town so long, almost like I'm the alien, I think it just has something to do with like part faith, because it's a very faith-based community. There are like almost enough churches there for every person in town. There's a lot of churches. And I think it's like Harry said, they just see that as an extension of God. And now I don't want to say that's everyone, because I don't think a lot of the younger crowd doesn't see it that way. The younger crowd, because there is a younger crowd, and I don't want to say this is all the young people in that town, but it's an unfortunate amount, are going through some type of horrible, depression. There's a lot of drug use.
Yeah.
And just doom has saturated the town. So I think when they see something like that, it's almost like a confirmation bias for the nihilism, because they're just like, oh, why not? End the world. Talking of the end of the world is a very common conversation you have in this town.
Really?
Whether it's with the faith-based community or with the atheists or just the paranormal, like the witches I was talking to and the mediums, either the spirit world has a war that's spilling into our world, or, Russia's going to nuke you, or we're going to nuke ourselves, or aliens are coming to destroy the world. It was like so bizarre. So I think the way they observe these things, even though they come from different types of worldviews, it confirms whatever their perception of the world is, whether it's we're not alone because of God, or we're about to be destroyed because of nihilism, or it's the spirit world, clashing with the physical world. So, I don't know for sure. I don't know if that's a good answer. That's kind of like the feeling I get from everyone I've talked to down there.
Okay, so Shane, I have to ask you this. So you've got these veins of gold that sit in the ground, veins of copper that sit in the ground. Mm. Do they believe that there's some sort of curse upon these veins, and that these veins sit there safe, that no one's trying to mine them because of this? Or are there people coming in trying to mine this gold? Or what is it and why the feeling of doom and gloom all the time? Yeah. What is it that holds these people in this kind of wheel of doom?
Yeah, I think so. That first question is a good theory. And no one I talked to had that theory. Maybe one person, because of the ley lines idea, had mentioned it, but it didn't really come up so much. But I think there's something to that for sure. I think the land is some type of like way of, communicating with something else, whether it's opening up some type of portal perhaps, or inviting others in to use those resources. Who knows? But the doom, I think the doom comes out of what I was saying earlier about the revolution, and even before the revolution and the battle of Kettle Creek in that town. It was I want to say I forget the name of the Indian tribe there, but they were massacring each other left and right. And then those descendants of those tribes still live in town. The descendants of almost all the people from back then are still alive today. And I think that creates a sense of doom for some of them, but also like it's like the Civil War was yesterday to some of them. Wow. Because I had met someone who was about to be 100, and when she was a young girl, she was able to meet someone who had fought in the Civil War, who was so old. So like the Civil War living memory is in their mind so much, and that defeat and, the scorched earth of Sherman, failed Reconstruction, and then the boll weevil, and then the fires, all that stuff, I think set off this perpetual doom. Now, it's also in the last few years, I think, with people being isolated and people losing jobs, it accelerated depression, mm-hmm. and it accelerated absurdity. And right. I think it also accelerated paranormal experiences. If you look at like people seeing ghosts or seeing UFOs, I think it spiked during quarantine.
Yeah.
So I think all of those things, the doom doesn't let up. And whether it's, for some, the doom is kind of a hope, because they see it as the rapture. If you believe in the rapture, they see it as Jesus coming back, and they're just leaving. So it's doom for everyone else, but they leave. If you talk to the people who think it's going to be war, it's just that we're all about to be annihilated by nuclear weapons. And then if you talk to the witches and the mediums, they believe that the war from the spirit world is spilling over into ours. So I think the doom is just coming from like many different types of angles, and it might be, like I said earlier, like it's accelerated because of COVID and the last few years of lockdowns and quarantine and whatnot. But it's a special type of doom in Washington, just because I think the Civil War to them was, basically yesterday. And a lot of the people in this town know the names of the people who fought in the war. It's a direct line. No one I knew in New York could trace a direct line back to the Civil War. Most, like my family came here after the Civil War from Russia or Ireland. Right. So a lot of us up there didn't have that. So that was something new to me, to experience almost a whole town that could all trace themselves back to the revolution, basically.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, there's just I mean, to hear that there's an entire town that's basically waiting around for doom and gloom is just not only disheartening, but it's just depressing.
It can seem that way too. And I don't want to sell them short because, like I said, all those churches, there is a lot of hope there. But like, I think because the doom is so real that you get like an extra dose of hope from some people, because they have their faith and they see, what they'll say is just outright evil. And to them, the doom is confirming their faith, right? And they battle it with that. So there is also that. I don't want to sell them short because I think it's a lot of the younger people, and I'm 37, so it's my age too, and lower, who are feeling completely nihilistic and doom laden. But there is still hope there, because I think the hope comes from the fact that Washington, Georgia has been destroyed so many times, but it's still here.
Right. Well, does that make the paranormal activity feel different? I mean, does it make it more intense? Do you see more intense demonic activity? Do you see more intense ghostly activity? I mean, is it?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I've never felt it like I felt it down there.
Really?
Honestly, like my skepticism was like, I had to like go real crazy with it. 'Cause I'm like, what is going on here? 'Cause I just kept encountering things. Like whether it was different mediums or, I walked through this one house. We call it the House of Seven Ghosts. And I found this medium to come because I was like, so I kind of got railroaded by people into looking for the gold. And I had to I was like, I got to find another way here. So I remember talking to this one girl, the girl who was screaming about the ghost that I told you about. Mm-hmm. She told me that the ghosts were telling her about where the lost gold was. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to talk to Anita about where the lost gold was. So I reach out to this guy, and he's amazing. But we're walking through the house, and I want to see him work and then talk to him about the gold. I don't want to just ask anybody. I want to know if I can trust this person as much as I possibly can when I'm asking him to talk to ghosts about the lost gold. And we're walking through the house, and he is recording, and he's talking to the ghost. I'm not hearing anything. But then, and I'm watching his mouth, because I'm always nervous that a medium who claims to talk to the dead is doing some type of ventriloquism. Yeah. I'm always I gotta watch the mouth. I'm watching this guy really closely, as is Clint, because he's with me. Clint kind of becomes my sidekick throughout the whole book, and this other lady's with us as well, who's our tour guide. And he's hearing something. I'm not hearing anything. He plays it back. And we hear a voice on the recording. And I'm watching him record it. I'm watching his mouth. I'm trying to see what could he possibly have done. Maybe there is some trickery I just haven't figured out yet. But I'm hearing this voice answer him with this no. And it's this disturbing no that's coming from this other place. And I didn't hear it in the real world, so there's that. But I heard it on his recording, and I watched that recording like a hawk and his mouth. And we were all like, damn. And then we walk into another room, and this is all just in 2 hours of this one spot. And he's got a great accent, this guy. I can't do it justice. I try my hand at accents in the videos, and I apologize to everyone in Washington, Georgia for it. They haven't stoned me yet, but but they might. And so we walk in this other room, and he's like, that doll's haunted. And he stops dead in his tracks. And I'm like, all right, here we go again. So he pulls out a pendulum. He does this little routine. And I'm like, I'm not feeling anything with this doll, honestly. I'm like, it looks creepy. Mm-hmm. It's from the 17th century. It's one of those dolls that a traveling salesman would bring around to show you the little outfit that he could make for you. Yeah. So that's that. He leaves, blah, 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 blah. He's got a great, crazy story, and he's featured in the House of Seven Ghosts Part 2. And later on in the book, when I'm staying at this house, in this hotel rather, that turns out to be run by witches in town, I'm talking to one of the witches, and I'm just getting her story. And I tell her about the doll I just told you about. Mm-hmm. And then she tells me a story that another lady had told me prior, which is she was there on a field trip as a young girl many years ago, and the doll at this house, and the doll flew off the chair, and everyone froze and was like, "What the heck was that?" And like all the kids and the tour guide and this witch I was talking to all said the doll flew off the chair. I'm like, "You're kidding me." So the guy I just talked to the other day who said this doll's haunted, I didn't really believe him. I then talked to this woman who calls herself a witch, and she was the girl who years back saw that very doll fly off the chair. I'm like, what are the odds? Like, it's just so weird how insular the town is with all the weirdness. So yeah, all that stuff was like under a magnifying lens for me. It just kept getting weirder day by day.
It sounds like it. One of the things speaking of weird, I've got to bring this up because as I'm watching the two videos that again you'd mentioned are open there on timcast.com. One of the videos there from Washington, you're talking to, and forgive me if I don't get the reference right here, but you're talking to a woman who is talking about how she's got this fear of poodles, and that she doesn't trust poodles, and you're trying to talk to her because it just seems like such an irrational fear. Poodles of all things, right?
Poodles. Who would have thought?
Right.
That conversation takes place in the hotel that I was just telling you about, but I had not stayed there yet. But I was out back having some drinks, meeting some of the people who live there, telling them that like, hey, I'm here to write about the gold. And everyone's immediately suspicious of anyone who's there to write about the gold, because like there's a whole lost gold economy in Washington. You know, I'm not the first schmuck to come to town looking for the gold. But so I'm telling them this, and this lady looks at me like, yeah, okay, whatever. What you should be writing about is the poodle invasion. And I'm like, the poodle invasion? And she was dead serious. I'm sitting right across from her. She's smoking a cigarette. She's looking at me through the smoke. And I'm like, what is this woman talking about? And she's like, yeah, the poodle invasion. She's like, everyone here has a poodle. I mean, everywhere I go, they have a poodle. I have a poodle. All this stuff. I'm like, really? And then, it dawned on me as I'm talking to her. I'm like, oh my God, I have a poodle. So I'm like, you're not going to believe this, lady, but I also have a poodle. And she looked at me. She almost fell off her chair. She's like, you got to be kidding me. And there are a lot of poodles there. And I noticed them on my first trip down, and I didn't see them really at all after that. It's almost like they were like exposed that night. Like, oh, she told him about the poodles, so they didn't reveal themselves. However, on my last day there, St. Patrick's Day, I walked out of my hotel, I went to my car, and there was a lady with a poodle. And I was like, that damn poodle. I think it looked at me a little weird too. He was like, I know you're leaving. This is our town now. I'm like, all right.
But she claims that the poodles are aliens.
Hey man, who are we to say they're not? Who are we to say? It's a great cover. They're cute. If you cut them up, you get the nice like all hair and stuff. I would never have suspected of poodles, but now it's all I think about.
You know, my grandparents had a poodle when I was young, and I mean, there's nothing unusual about the poodle. I wouldn't have thought that the poodle was an alien. I mean, it acted a little strange from time to time, but I didn't think that it was anything unusual.
No. Yeah, I think the next book I write is going to have to be a deep dive into the poodles. What is going on with the poodles? I
think you got a New York Times bestseller on your hands, my friend, if you just title it "Poodles Are Aliens."
That's it. You have to know. Everyone should know. I'm going to scream it from the rooftop.
Or poodles have invaded us.
Yes.
That might be another one.
Yes.
You know, but yeah, I think it's straight to number one.
I think so too. Yeah. I'll have to tell that lady I need to interview her one more time, and her poodle.
That's right. See if you can get a direct quote.
yeah. Don't tempt me, dude.
The poodle said, "Arf, arf. By the way, we know everything."
That's right.
No, I mean, you know, because if you were to say like cats are aliens, everybody would go, well, no shit, we know that. But if you say poodles are aliens, it's like, ooh, you know what? That's like the whole bird theory. You know how the guy over this last winter, spring, fall had the whole, you know, birds aren't what they seem thing. Mm-hmm. You know, birds aren't birds.
I wrote all about that in the first Inverted World book. I was staring at where was I? Somewhere in West Virginia, staring at a crow. And it was looking at me a little weird, a little too weird. I was like, that can't, what is up with that bird? And then I think like the algorithm must have read my mind, because soon after, birds aren't real started popping up all over the place.
Yeah. See?
Which is, so for those who don't know, but I'm sure people listening, that most of them probably know, but there's that hilarious birds aren't real meme. Maybe it's not hilarious. Maybe he's as real as the lady with the poodle invasion. But when I wrote about the birds aren't real thing, this is the problem. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about orbs. And like, once you have one experience, or what I said earlier about like Tuskegee and things like that, it's like, once you know one weird thing has happened, it's hard to discount even the most absurd things elsewhere. Cause like our government has like tried to make spies out of cats and send them out into the world.
True.
We have created bird drones. Like, things are possible. Yeah. Now, are all the birds drones? I don't know. I'm not cutting them all up yet, but like, it's possible. Who knows? It's a good theory, and some of them might be, for all I know. But I find it a rather fascinating theory. Oh, you know what it was? It actually started. It was before I saw the bird looking at me askew in West Virginia. It was all the birds in the areas to live in had fallen out of the sky and died. It was one of those weird mass death events. Yep. And it was. I think they were crows, and no one knew why. Like, I talked to the people who actually opened up the birds and examined them, like those very birds, and like talked to the people who found the birds and everyone. I was just like, what the heck is going on with these birds? Because it's not the only one. I'm sure we can name many across the world that have happened in the past 5 years alone. And then that led me down the path of me looking at the birds a little like, are you what you think you are?
Well, that wasn't the first spate of birds either. There was like, if I remember right, there was like 2 or 3 flocks that had died before that. And it was a huge flock. It wasn't just like, it wasn't like 30 or 40 that had died. It was hundreds that had died in each one of these flocks. Yeah.
So weird. It's so weird. And like we were saying earlier, like in terms of the skepticism, like, it could have been in other places. There was fireworks that they say might have done it to other birds, or it was a storm that pushed them into electric lines or something. But in this particular one that I was investigating in the town of Wallkill, New York, it was, no one knew. Like, they looked for poison. It happened at the very beginning of COVID. So we even thought maybe it was like COVID, like who knew? Yeah. But to this day, no one knows what it was with those birds. So maybe their batteries just ran out.
It could be. It could have been.
and they refused to tell us.
The battery packs went out. Well, see, you got to start using the lithiums. I mean, they're the better battery anyway.
Come on now. Yeah. We all know this.
I mean, they're terrible for the environment, but they're so good.
Yeah, since when does the government care about that?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, they don't care. We're all not going to be around in 100 years anyways. It doesn't matter.
Right.
Start using the good batteries, government. Yeah. Like they're listening anyways right now. I mean,
Oh, they are.
Oh, are they?
If they're not, their birds are.
Well, that's true. There's probably one on the windowsill behind me. Yeah. Or is there?
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. I think I have that sound effect on my button bar too. I'm just not pushing it. Interesting stuff. So as we were mentioning, or as you'd mentioned earlier, this is the second volume of your Tales from the Inverted World book. You actually have a first volume, and in that first volume, and we had mentioned Are Birds Real? That was part of that first volume. You also investigate the Long Island serial killer. We do a True Crime Tuesday show as well.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So
I love, that one's a really bizarre story.
Is it? Can you expound on it just a little bit for us?
Yeah. So with the Inverted World, sometimes it's not just the paranormal. Sometimes it's like, to me, the Inverted World is like, just like the most horrific things that we choose to just ignore as society, or we see it at a glance in a headline, we wince, and then we go about our day. Right. And the Long Island serial killer is one of those stories where I remember when I first heard about it, and I was living in Brooklyn, New York at the time, and Long Island wasn't very far. And I remember them just finding 4 women at first, but then like it was a graveyard on Gilgo Beach in Long Island. And I was like, and it was just horrific. It's horrific when anyone dies.
Yeah.
But then when you hear about the cadaver dog, his name was Blue. I'll never forget that. Blue, the cadaver dog, walking the beach, just being trained, and he finds the first set of remains. And then, like, you know, just a little bit beyond that, another pair of remains. And then I think there was a snowstorm that came back, and they kept finding remains. And then it was like a child. And then it was the mother of that child. And then it was like, I might be getting the details a little wrong. It was a long time since I wrote that story,
Sure.
but let's say it was a pair of hands in Gilgo Beach that matched a torso in Manorville, Long Island, that they found many years earlier, right? That, when I read that detail, I was like, I get chills now just thinking about it. That they found a mutilated torso posed in the woods 30 or 40 minutes away from the beach 20 years prior. I think it was 20 years prior. And then they found the hands on Gilgo Beach. So it's like, so no one knows who the Long Island serial killer is. Lots of theories. So that's about when I got involved with it, because I had started hearing about the online community trying to solve it themselves. And it had been unsolved for so long. So you guys must know about all this if you do the true crime stuff. Like, the online community was first, I think it was a website, you might know about it, that was created in like the immediate aftermath of the remains being found. It was called something like LongIslandSerialKiller.com. I could be wrong with that title, but it's gone now anyway, because it got so insane of like people, like it was like a paranoid delusion. Everyone was blaming everyone. You're the killer. You're the killer. And it was getting like really slanderous and terrifying, because victims' families were trying to use it for answers.
Yeah.
And then people were creeping in trying to kind of like, I call them, excuse the language, grief whores, where it's like they try to become the grief and they want to own it. They want to be a part of it. It's like now they want to be the person who solves it, even if it like hurts people, even if they're using misinformation and they're like kind of like oddly abusing the family members. So I got involved and I just kind of like tagged along digitally with all various types of people who have inserted themselves into the investigation. There's like a guy who worked at a haunted house in Vegas, and he was deeply embedded with the family members. And he had his life threatened. You know, there's a stay-at-home mom who started Web Sleuths. You might know Web Sleuths. Yeah. It's a great community. So I talked to the lady who basically took it over around the time of the John Benet Ramsey story. So a while ago. And I just kind of fell down the rabbit hole of these people. And it was super dark, just like learning not only about all of these gruesome, weird, unsolved murders in Long Island that may or may not all be attached. Maybe Gilgo Beach is just a dumping grounds for lots of people. Maybe the Long Island serial killer is a team of people who work together. Or maybe it's just one really good serial killer who hasn't been found out yet. But like, you know, so many people were accused, and so many strange people, like the sheriff, you know, in Long Island, in Gilgo Beach. You know, that guy's history was so alarming to me. Like, as a child, he had watched children beat a boy to death and then stuffed the dead boy's mouth with rocks. Yeah. And that guy, you know, testified against them, that he becomes like the sheriff. He gets caught later. I don't know if he was sheriff yet, but he was a cop. Gets caught with a sex worker in his patrol car. You know, while he's investigating the Long Island serial killer case, he beats up a kid who steals pills and special toys out of his car. So everything with that story was just so wild. I couldn't, kind of like with Washington, like I was every time I turned around, it was a new weird detail that you want to go down, because you understand there's no answer. So you got to go down every tunnel there is to find any type of sort of truth. And I spent a lot of time, years actually, with that story. So yeah, that's the last chapter of that first book is me and all the weird stuff I found out about with that crazy story.
It is a crazy story indeed. And man, you talk about an area where if you could find any area as a serial killer and pick one where you could absolutely get away with murdering multiple people and never be caught. Long Island, New York, I would think would be one of those areas.
Have you ever been out there?
Oh yeah. I have been.
Oh
yeah.
man, it is. My parents are from there. So like I'd go back. Now I go back. It feels different to me, because it's like when you look at like the map of where the bodies have been found, not just in Gilgo, but like in the past 30 years, it's insane. It's almost like looking at flight maps, like all the flights, because it's just like, how does this happen all the time? And you're right. It is it's super isolated, which is funny because it's kind of another connection to Washington, Georgia, where it's like these really isolated places, I think, are these cesspools of weird, violent, paranormal things that people either manifest or imagine, or they're really happening, like the killers. So yeah, and that strip of road on Gilgo Beach is quite terrifying because on one hand, it's a tourist trap for the beach every summer, but in the winter, it's completely desolate, and it's just a long strip of road, and it's terrifying thinking of someone knowing how confident they are with something with remains in their trunk. I'm assuming that's how it happened. Pulling over, feeling confident enough to then walk over to the beach through the bramble, dump this body that was wrapped in canvas that seems to me, at least, that they had placed elsewhere for a long amount of time or some amount of time, and then just go about their day. It's pretty crazy stuff. It was it definitely. I had a few fearful moments right in that story when we uncovered this. I didn't really uncover it, but I kind of tripped into this horrible website called Utopia Guide. Did you ever get into Utopia Guide or hear about that?
That one I haven't. No.
So we found, and this is when I was hooked up with the web sleuths people, we found this horrible website that's men from Long Island who kind of rate their sex workers through Utopia Guide. It's almost like a Yelp.
Really?
But it was created before Yelp. So Yelp is kind of like Utopia Guide, but they have like a rating system. I'm not sure if it still exists out there, but y'all can look. But beware, because some of it is just, it's just gross. You hear these gross guys talk about the people they pick up, and it is what it is. But there are some who are incredibly violent, or at least they write incredibly violent reviews. And some of those reviews most of those reviews were, people loved it. And you hear these long threads of like what they do to these poor women. And then you're like, damn. And like, this is like that area, right? And most of the people who were targeted for the Long Island serial killer were sex workers. So it's like, I spent so much time. I tried calling them, and I went a little too far maybe. But I was like, that something is in there. I'm sure someone had to have investigated, in the authorities, this website, because it was that exact demographic in that exact area. And if you go back far enough, you can see them even talking about the first bodies being found. So it was a weird insight into that community. And if I'm remembering correctly, a few of them had been with some of those women, right? So like they knew them. So it was like, wow, it was so insane to read that stuff. Like I don't want to harp on this too much, but like I remember one thing that bothered me was I could go back to 9/11/2001 on Utopia Guide, watch them find out about what happened while also reviewing hookers.
No.
Yes. Yeah. It was so bizarre. It was so bizarre.
Oh my God.
Couldn't believe it. And they didn't stop. They're like, oh, man, a plane went into the tower. They're like, no way. Holy shit. And then it was like, by the way, so-and-so is pretty good. I rate her this and that. I'm like, man, this is pretty disturbing stuff.
Wow. You bring up an interesting point, Shane. You would think that, there should be a cop who's all over that site, who's looking up suspects or forming a suspect list off of that site, and then cross-referencing and going through and just, calling suspects left and right off of Utopia Guide. You'd be amazed how even at that time, they probably weren't even looking twice at it. They were probably going through old leads and going through old ways of calling suspects at that point.
Yep. Like, I got to talk to people, two young men who found one of the bodies in Manorville, which was connected to the Lisk killer. So I talked to him, and this is a weird coincidence with me that I just found weird. I went to college with his sister, so it was just like so bizarre. She'd heard I'd written about I was writing about it, and she's like, "Oh, my brother found that body," and like so like well, I say that because like the cops were looking at him like he was a suspect, right?
Right.
Meanwhile, they weren't, as far as I know, not looking into Utopia Guide. But like I told you earlier, the sheriff also was getting sex workers. So what are the odds he might have used Utopia Guide? I don't know. I'm not going to say one way or the other, but maybe it's possible.
I think it might have been pretty good.
I mean, it's on record that he was with them, you know, like in his car, and he got in trouble, but still became sheriff. So, hey, who knows?
Who knows, indeed. Wow. Wow. That's some eye-opening stuff, my friend. That's for sure. For sure.
Yep.
Let's switch gears just a little bit here. Our time is winding down just a little bit, but I do want to hit these points real quick. I want to switch gears back to Washington, Georgia, in that there are some coincidences here that we want to talk about, and I do want to end today talking a little bit about the Georgia Guidestones. We'll talk about that in a minute. There was a fire that burnt down the town square. Tell us a little bit about that fire.
So this was a coincidence. So I experienced a ton of coincidences, and this was just another coincidence that I didn't experience, but someone else had. And I was just like, what is it about this town? So I open up a chapter. I can't remember the name. I can't remember the chapter, but it's in this book and I found this amazing article by this woman named Elizabeth Bowen, and she was the journalist in like the late 1800s of Washington, Georgia, and she collected everything. She was an amazing writer, and for all that I could tell, very objective. Like there was never any opinion. It was just, this is the straight reporting. Great woman from what I could tell from her writing. Anyway, she told this great story that I'd seen written in a few other articles from down there from I want to say 1895. A woman in town was sick in Washington. So her and her husband traveled 30 minutes north to a doctor to get better. She woke up that night in this doctor's house, fever, terrible, chills, woke up her husband. Her husband was some captain. She said, I had a terrible dream. Washington, Georgia burnt down. And he was like, what? That's how I imagine him saying it. It's probably better. And she said, yeah, it started from this street and it went to this street and this building and this building and this building. And he, I imagine, looked at her and was like, okay, you're sick. This is crazy. I'm going back to bed. Next day rolls around. He's outside. I'm imagining he's like smoking some cigar. And a man on a horse comes up from Washington, Georgia, from that direction. And the captain is like, and you got any news? And he's like, Washington burnt down last night. And he's like, what? So he's like, all right, I'm leaving my wife. I'm going down to Washington because this is insane. And he goes down and yeah, his wife was right. Like, and Elizabeth wrote about this, and you see the articles about the fire all over the place from this time. It started on that street, as she said it did, and it went through the town like she said it did, and burnt down all the buildings. And I was like, what is up with this? Like premonition, coincidence, I don't know what. But for me, it was like a weird confirmation bias. I was like, okay, something is weird here. I'm trying to push back on all this weirdness, but people keep experiencing weird things, and that's just one of many fires that happened. But it was a horrible fire that happened, and I include Elizabeth's article about it because she was a great writer, and I loved. She almost was like my ghost I was talking to because I had her articles, and it was like she was the closest I really got to talking to the dead. Sometimes I'd be like, "What did Elizabeth say about this?" And I'd flip through her book and be like, "There it is." But in terms of coincidences for me, the first one was, like I told you about that woman within my first 2 hours of being in town that ran out of the building screaming. So I talked to her, and she tells me all about how she talks to the dead all the time. She can't get them out of her head. And, you know, something physical, chemical had happened to her. So it's hard for me to prove that she's telling the truth, but she was visibly shaken by something. So I had that much going. But the day earlier, 2 days earlier, I got my haircut from my friend and in New York at the time. And she is telling me about her friend who is a medium who talks to ghosts all the time. She can't go to places because the ghosts are always talking to her. And she's like, I even like my friend's friend was like, she walked into the salon and she said, there's something new in here. And it looks like something your mom once had. And she's like, how do you know this? She's like, I didn't tell anybody that I bought this, and it's in the closet. No one's seen it. And it was this paper towel like holder with a heart-shaped design that looked exact. She bought it because the heart shape was exactly like the keychain that her mom gave her. Her mom had passed away many years prior. Okay. And her friend is just one of these people who is like an exposed nerve to the dead. Everywhere she goes, she's inundated with voices. So I heard that story. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. The heart thing, okay, that's interesting. I don't know what kind of parlor trick you could do for that, but it's weird. And then I go down to Georgia and I meet this lady. I'm like, it's almost like I was meant to hear that story to then meet this lady and, at least not discount it immediately. So like, it kind of like opened me up to, I want to believe you. This is weird, but it was cool. Of all the people I met, the medium with the doll that I told you about, I believe him. Not as much as I believe this one lady. Like, she was onto something else that I just can't explain. But then like the coincidence is just every time I turned around, like, it's just weird stuff. I'm trying to think what was the other one that blew my mind.
Is there something with Jefferson Davis's?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that was weird. So one of the things about the Civil War is just this like constant battle of the tradition of the documented history and the oral tradition. Mm-hmm. And like, who knows what, how do you know what to believe, yada, 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 all that stuff. So I grew up in West Point, like I said, mm-hmm. and I kind of always looked up to Sherman as like almost, I don't want to say an angel, but not a bad guy at all, a do-gooder, right? Okay. Yep. And that was like what they tell you in West Point. I never really looked into it, but man, was he not that? Like, he was the thing. Like, I knew about the march and how horrible it was, but it was like the way I learned it growing up, it was just like a necessary evil. What a horrible thing to even think now is like. And what did it for me was this one story in particular with, I forget the name of it. I do. The Massacre at Ebenezer Creek. And this is during the March to the Sea. And I'm sure some listeners are probably like, oh man, you didn't know about that. But I really didn't. And it did blow my mind when I found out about it. And basically, Sherman had, freed a lot of slaves because he was burning down the South. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these freed slaves were following Sherman. And one of the, I don't know if he's a sergeant or a captain or whatever, but on the Union side, one of the guys in charge with Sherman happened to be named Jefferson Davis, right? A Union soldier named Jefferson Davis. Very bizarre. Mm-hmm. Jefferson Davis despised the freed slaves, and he hated them following him. He saw it as like a problem. So they basically just drowned them all, like hundreds, if not thousands, pulled out the bridge from underneath him. I believe they shot at him. I can't really find proof of the shooting part, okay, but I have seen lots of proof of them just drowning children in the arms of women. And Sherman was just like, yeah, he had to do it. There was no repercussions. And it's just like, dang, it's that kind of thing where it's like, it's so hard to just say one thing is all good and one thing is all evil. Yeah. And that story in particular really, there's a ton of other stories like that, but that one in particular, but the coincidence of Jefferson Davis doing such a horrible thing, and it's a Union guy named Jefferson Davis. I was like, wow. Lincoln did like apologize, and I think he did go down there, and I think he gave away some land, but man, a lot of people died. And Sherman, was pretty vocal about it being a net good for the Union. So yeah, I was just like, man, crazy stuff. And, I just it kind of blew apart my idea of the Civil War. And I knew the nuance. I thought I did. Mm-hmm. I knew, I tend to like to think that not everyone can be purely evil. Not everyone can be purely good. Some people surely are. But in terms of this story, in terms of the paranormal stuff, definitely impacted me on a level I did not expect in that town. But so did the way I viewed history and the way I viewed just, people like Sherman and the March and people like Jefferson Davis and the Confederacy and just and the concept of time. Like I told you earlier, how they're so connected to the war down there, good and bad, all parts of it, that it's a different experience learning about the war from people who can draw a direct line to it. And when I say learn about, I don't want to say everything they say is true verbatim, but that oral tradition to me is as important as the documented history. Sure. And that's something I think I want people to always keep in mind, if they don't already, to straddle the idea that not everything that, just because it's official and documented doesn't mean it's real. And just because grandma told you also doesn't mean it's real. But you got to take all of it with a grain of salt and try to do your best to look at everything to get some concept of the truth, if you can at all.
Yeah, I definitely see what you're saying there. With the Georgia Guidestones, we'd pointed it out earlier that they were destroyed just a few weeks back, and that's still a bit of a mystery as to how that happened. Although it sounds like you may have an idea how it happened. Do you have an idea?
Well,
do you have a theory?
I know a lot of theories. Okay. I know how they say it happened. So I was there just a few months ago for the first time looking at the Guidestones. It's pretty remarkable. Have you been there?
I've not been to it. No. In fact, I wanted to go see them before this happened. Yeah.
It's too bad. It was interesting to see, this, because it was in Elberton, and Elberton, I wasn't really aware just how important granite was to the town. Like, there are just open wounds of granite mining everywhere. Like, the whole town is run by granite. So, and I think they produce 90% of the tombstones in America.
Wow.
So they all come out of that town. So I went to the Guidestones. Pretty neat. I don't really agree with the message on the Guidestones, because to me, they just seem a little eugenicist, if I might add. Like, sure. Yeah. I don't like the idea of telling someone who and who can't procreate. Right. They seem to do that. Although there are things on there that I do like. Well, I'm like, oh yeah, we should protect the environment. Okay, I'm into that. But anyway, someone blew them up. And did you see the video of that? I saw it roughly, the little bits and pieces you see on the news or whatever you see. I haven't seen the whole video yet, as of yet, no. So there is video out there. I don't know if they've actually released all of it, but there is video of a guy putting a shape charge on one of the 4 columns, and then running away, and it blows up. It seemed like, I don't know, like, I don't know why he didn't do all of it. If you really wanted to show him, that's, who knows. But those Guidestones have been vandalized constantly, right? This was inevitable, right? Like, when I was there, I just happened to be there on the day that they were cleaning them again, right? Because people put pentagrams on them. People try to decapitate chickens on them. People try to do like these weird Santeria things on them. People get married there, all this stuff. So I think this was inevitable. I've heard a lot of rumors. I can't say for certain what it is, but I think it was probably political. I think there's a large group of people who see the Guidestones maybe in a different way than I do. Like, they see them bad, but I think they see them as completely evil. I can't really subscribe to the idea that some stones are evil. I think they might have some evil messages. I don't know if they're like, some people think they're purely satanic. I can't say that for certain. I don't know. But from what I'm hearing is, like, some people believe that they are purely satanic and globalist, and they want to promote this one world order, and that they had to go, and it was like a symbolic gesture to get rid of them. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But what I do know is that there's no more investigation, I guess, and they're not really looking into it. I think the investigation has stopped. So what does that tell me? A few things. It could mean that the police are cool with it and they agree, and they're just like, yeah, go on your merry way. Or maybe they're just clueless as they are in Long Island, the serial killer. I don't know. But my gut tells me that someone who truly hates them destroyed them. Because, there's a lot of people who think they're either satanic, but there's other people who think they're Christian. No one knows what the heck they're talking about. But everyone down there has a different perspective on the stones. And the thing that also bothered me is, why get rid of them so quickly? Why demolish them? I'm always like a little suspicious when you get rid of something quickly, when we could have gathered a little more evidence. There's also supposedly a time capsule that was buried beneath it. Yeah. And I don't know if you saw the news in the days after the demolition, but there was like that fake piece of news saying like they found Quaaludes or something and like porno mags, and people believed it, but that was fake. It was completely fake news. Supposedly, from what I'm gathering, they opened a time capsule in secret, and no one knows what was in it. And whatever authorities were there got it. So I have no idea. I will say this, and then I promise I'll stop.
Yeah, by all means, continue.
This all did happen soon after the Large Hadron Collider was turned on, which is my least favorite machine in the world.
Okay.
So that's when they started smashing particles again into nearly the speed of light. And every time they do that, for those who don't know, they create the microscopic black holes that fall to the center of the Earth. And some people think that might switch the timeline. Some people think that might destroy the Earth. There was a lawsuit that was, I think, in 2008 to prevent the Large Hadron Collider from turning on because the scientists believed it would create a black hole that would swallow the Earth. And sometimes it does feel like that. So a lot of weird things happened in the wake of the collider being turned back on. Maybe that's just an easy thing to blame, but I've been blaming it since 2008, and I will continue to blame it.
I don't blame you. You know, it's interesting, Shane. I'm just looking up the Wikipedia page to get an idea. And mind you, Wikipedia is not the be-all, end-all. But on the destruction, now keep in mind that it was Robert Christian or somebody going under the pseudonym of Robert Christian.
RC,
RC, who built it and then turned it over to Elbert County.
Yeah.
Elbert County has owned the guide stones, and it's been on Elbert County's land ever since, and it is Elbert County's land. But essentially, they're saying that they're going to rebuild the guide stones initially the way they were. I
haven't heard that.
Lock, stock, and barrel. And yeah, in fact, it says here, let me see if I can find the paragraph here. It says the Elbert County Sheriff's Office is investigating the bombing with assistance from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. On the evening of the bombing, the GBI released a video showing both the explosion and a vehicle of interest leaving the scene shortly before. No motive has been publicly shared and no suspects publicly identified. On July 14th of 2022 and again on July 25th of 2022, the GBI gave an update with no significant progress on the case being made since the bombing. The guide stones were maintained by the county and as such were considered a public building. Thus, their destruction would carry a minimum sentence of 20 years in prison, interestingly enough. Elberton Mayor Daniel Graves said the town plans to rebuild the monument exactly as it was, adding, quote, "We're just getting geared up and excited about rebuilding them. It's going to happen. It may take us 6 months to a year to do it, but we're going to do it."
Wow. I haven't heard that. That's amazing. So I will say, I never trust Wikipedia, but it's got to be, if that guy said it, I'm sure it's going to happen. I think things like the guide stones and things like the lost gold in the nearby town of Washington, they almost become like an economy in themselves. Like they're a draw to people. So it's unfortunate that it is just a tourist trap that people, it's not unfortunate because I want the towns to have something because they're so isolated and I'm happy they have something. But the guide stones they give me an icky feeling and I'm surprised they're bringing them back. Maybe they'll put something different in the time capsule if they even do the time capsule. But now that I know that, I'm going to have to be there for the ribbon cutting.
Yeah.
That's on my list.
It's interesting because they even put the inscription and everything in the Wikipedia page if you want to see what the inscription is. There's 10 basic rules. I guess we can read them off here if you want. Like you said, they're creepy. Some people agree with all 10, some people don't. The inscription reads, number 1, maintain humanity under 500. Is this 500 million?
Yeah.
In perpetual balance with nature.
Yeah, how do you do that?
Oh, that's there isn't an easy way to do that, my friend.
Yeah, I don't like that one.
Guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. Number 3, unite humanity with a living new language. 4, rule passion, faith, tradition, and all things with tempered reason. Number 5, protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts. Number 6, let all nations rule internally, resolving external disputes in a world court. So Yeah, as you read that, you kind of go, does that mean one world order?
Does to me.
Yeah, it does. It does
like
suggest that. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the idea of protect people, but continue, please.
Yeah. Number 7, avoid petty laws and useless officials. Number 8, balance personal rights with social duties. Number 9, prize truth, beauty, love, seek harmony with the infinite. And number 10, be not a cancer on the earth. Leave room for nature. Leave room for nature.
Okay, so I'm a pretty big fan of Teddy Roosevelt. Not a perfect man, but a good president, I think. And that last one resonates with me because that's something Teddy would have said, right?
Yeah.
Leave your campground cleaner than when you found it. And I also like the idea of seeking harmony. And I also believe we have a ton of useless officials. Maybe all of them are useless. And I believe in protecting people. And I believe in tempered reason. But I don't understand how you maintain a population under a certain amount. And I also don't understand how you think you can guide wisely. Because, like, to me, okay, I'm into that to some extent. You can tell people, you can try to tell people or teach people what you think is best. But I don't think there is one umbrella definition of best or wise. You know, different people have different ideas of that.
Yeah.
So to me, like those first two really do seem like eugenic, and then that world court thing is terrifying.
Yeah.
So I don't like those things. So to me, it's almost like the Guidestones were one big troll, and they were like, we're just going to get everybody on all sides pissed off, and who knows? But I know like the R.C. Christian story, and it was a pseudonym, and no one knows supposedly who it was. I don't know what to believe with any of that stuff, and it's exciting. The whole thing was weird and exciting to be there and to see it and then come home. And literally, as I just handed in the story that I wrote about that, I'm like, oh, they just got blown up. That's crazy. What a weird thing, you know. And just another coincidence real quick was like yesterday we put out a story. It was chapter 6 on Timcast, and the two weird coincidences. It was the anniversary of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, two things I talk about in the story. And I talked to these women who call themselves witches, who talk about the world spinning out of control and the poles reversing. And then the story had just come out in like Business Insider and all these other places about they believe the earth is spinning faster than usual, and we don't know why. Yeah,
we just covered that yesterday on Supernatural News. In fact, the Earth spun on 2 different days in July. It was June or July, one in June, one in July, 1.59 milliseconds faster than it was supposed to be. And they're talking about doing leap seconds in order to get the Earth back to where it's supposed to be.
Oh boy!
But they're saying you can't. Scientists are saying you can't keep doing leap seconds to do that, and they're saying it has to do with moon tides and moon phases. And I think.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think I could forward you the article too.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, but it has everything completely to do with the fact that the moon is closer now to the Earth than it's ever been. So,
great.
Yeah, so it has to do with that relationship.
So you're saying it's the end of the world, like everyone in Washington.
I don't know that it's the end of the world. I think it just has to do with spatial relationships between the moon and the Earth.
How close can the moon get before it all goes bad? How does that work? I
don't think they're saying the moon is getting closer per se. I just think that it's just it's the closest it's ever been. So they're saying
because I was always under the impression that the moon was slowly drifting away over time.
It didn't state that in the article, I don't think, from what I remember.
Well, like most things you learn as a kid, you learn that they might not be true. But I always remember the story of, so they say something hit the Earth and debris formed the rings around Earth. The debris slowly turned into the moon, which was very close to the Earth at the time, and the moon slowly drifting away. But like I said, who knows?
Either way, yeah, the days are speeding up by a millisecond, which is throwing off our days.
Great.
Yeah. So
that's why I'm so tired.
Well, yeah. I mean, it is throwing off your internal timing. It's throwing off everybody's internal timing. It's throwing off, it's throwing off our clocks, our calendars, and all that other thing. So
Yeah,
our
cool.
atomic
cool,
clock.
That's literally what the witches were talking about in the story too. Before I'd read that article, I talked to them months ago. They were like, something's way off. Like they were sensing something. I mean, I feel like the world's always just weird and off, but it was just funny that they were saying the exact things that basically these articles that I saw yesterday were kind of confirming.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're onto something.
Yeah. Yep. So yeah, that is true. That is a true story.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting stuff. That's for sure. Yeah. There's all kinds of interesting things. It's funny, Shane. We talk about, are we in the end times or are we in a weird phase, or in an end phase? We talk to, if you talk to some people, this is just a transition to the next phase in astrology, when you talk to astrologers, and I know some people may be rolling their eyes out there that don't believe in astrology. But when you talk to some people who believe in some of the older sciences, and they'll say, well, this is just moving from one age to another, and we're going through that uncomfortable birthing process. And so, of course, everybody who goes through that uncomfortable birthing process from one age to another runs into these things that feel like the end of the world.
Right. I think it's easy sometimes to confuse that type of change with the end of the world, because it is kind of just the end of one type of world. I have hope. I kind of balance doom and hope all the time. And I just, like, when we talk about, and anytime I talk with someone with the end times, like you right now, and what I think about is every generation probably thinks they're the last generation. It's kind of an ego thing, but it's also my grandparents, they lived through all the assassinations of the 60s. Before that, World War II, Holocaust, stuff like that. They saw total despair. My grandfather was like a cop in New York City in the 70s when it was on fire all the time. He would say he had a dead body every day. He would be called to another location, had to sit with a body who had been beaten to death or shot to death. And I'd feel like that was hell, the end of the world. But they got through it. And as much as I wanted to despair over all this stuff all the time, maybe this has something to do with me being a father of two young kids, but it's like I kind of have to put on my happy clown face all the time for them, because I know eventually they're going to inherit the inevitable doom of the world that we all feel as we grow up. But it's like you don't want them to have it now. And I'm like, I don't want to infect them with the doom, although I'm seeing it and I'm trying to push it back from them. Eventually they will see it. That is inevitable. But maybe some of my hope is coming from reminding them, also life is really beautiful and weird and mysterious, and it's amazing. There's so many things to love and be joyous about. So you got to balance all those things all the time. That to me is crucial.
See, you bring up a good point, and I think it's also important to balance. You talk about your grandfather was the cop in New York 70s, in New York in the 70s. See, my grandfather, and I'm a little bit older, my grandfather was the one of the first frogmen in World War II, and served 2 tours in World War II. He was shot in Italy in the army, came home, got a Purple Heart, went back into the Navy, into Corregidor, and became one of the first frogmen, and served in the Philippines. So, he incredibly brave, but then came home. He came home and he came home anxious to marry my grandmother and start a family, and then from there it's building America. And then I think the mindset there is, okay, we've been through the worst. We've been through the worst that there is. What more is there to do? Now we need to build the country. So we've been through a nightmare. Now we move forward and we build upon a dream. Now we start a dream. And I think for them,
that's crazy.
Yeah. So they had a different mindset. And then where my father's generation was, the baby boomers, I think it was, they taught that generation that, we struggled, but we made it, Now it's time for you to, go out there and do what you did. And I think that generation, I don't know, they screwed our generation up somehow. You know, I think
something went wrong.
Yeah, I think they misinterpreted what the talk was. You know, they misinterpreted the dream talk. You know, because
I see exactly what you're saying. And like, I had a thought while you were saying it about your grandfather, which what an amazing story that is. Is like, and I don't want to speak for all of those types of soldiers, but I feel like the ones I've talked to, I grew up in a military base. When you're in that type of physical insanity, you're almost emotionally turned off. Yeah. And you are operating like on some other level of survival, right? Mm-hmm. And when you come home, the emotions turn back on, and that might be where that early PTSD comes in, where it's like the emotions are slowly cranked back on. You saw literal like hell on earth, and you can't really, some did, some just lived. Others, you know, didn't. That happens, I think, through all wars, Vietnam too, and Korea. And but with like our generation, what's happening now is like there hasn't really been. Well, there has been. I have plenty of friends who've been to, you know, Iraq and Afghanistan, but even that war is different. And like with our generation, I feel like we have almost no physical world altercations anymore, and this emotional rot from isolation, from internet, social media. Not that that's all bad, that stuff, but it's got some, you know, it's pros and cons. And it's like the inverse of your grandfather, where like this spiritual death is happening in all of us. Not all of us, you know what I mean? But something's happening there where it's like the that rot spiritually from isolation, depression, being alone maybe more often than we should. I think something's happening there that's bothersome, and it's really bad. And that doom is really hard to shake. The other doom is like you saw it, hopefully you came back. I can't say you might conquer it, but it's like you survived and you're here still, and you're wrestling with all those emotions. But it's something different right now with like, because it's individual emotional rot that is that I've been experiencing that is kind of alarming.
You're absolutely right. And, you know, I think there's a huge difference between the greatest generation that got in there and raised their kids, to the baby boomers that kind of let their kids run, to a new generation of helicopter parents that want to insulate children. Again, you know, there's too many extremes. There's not the perfect extreme, or I shouldn't say extreme. There is no extreme with a perfect parent, which is the perfect balance of live life, but be careful.
Yep. You know, it's like, it's a horrible thing to have to contend with. Like, I never want to see my kid cry.
Yeah.
But they got to cry.
They do.
You got to cry. Unfortunately, suffering is necessary. I don't want you to suffer forever, but unfortunately, you're going to have to suffer, because hopefully you learn to overcome the suffering and you get stronger from it. I don't want to see you get hurt at all. I hate seeing people get hurt. I don't ever want to see my kids get hurt, but it happens. Yeah. I can't stop it from happening. Hopefully they learn from it. You know, I don't know if helicopter parenting, all that stuff. And sometimes I can be accused of that. Like, I chase my 2-year-old around. I'm like, she can turn anything into something dangerous. Yeah. And I'm like, but she's got to learn, you know? Yeah. And hopefully learning at that age will hopefully bake something into her as she grows up and knows to avoid certain types of dangers. One can hope. I don't know.
Because you know what happens when you don't feel, Shane? When you stop feeling, when you shut down and you don't feel a thing, you go to more and more extremes to try to feel.
That's so true. That's so true. Because you create a void in you at that point, and the void is never full. That's right. And you do whatever you can to do it. And it can come in various forms. That's right. You know, you think of drugs and drinking, but it could be anything. That's right. Anything to an excess is detrimental to you and your perspective, your heart, your health, all that stuff. So yeah, you got to have a little bit of everything, unfortunately, as bad as that might be. But I think there's something to be learned from all that stuff. You're exactly right. I try. That's right. That's right. So now that we've preached to the world, that's right, and solved the world's problems in one podcast,
We can be done pontificating and throw our arms out to the sky. If you want more pontificating, you can find Shane. No, I'm kidding. Actually, Shane's got a wonderful podcast out there and got some wonderful videos you might want to see as well. We'll have the link to timcast.com in the description of the show where you can see those videos. By the way, beautifully artistically done, the videos that are available for you to watch right now. There's a couple of videos that are out there right now, Tales from the Inverted World. The ones that I watched, the skeleton at the gates to hell, and the gold, the fire, and the howling ghost, which I believe are still available, right, Shane?
Yep.
They're
out there. They're free. You can find them on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and on Timcast.
Great. So go check those out. I'll tell you, those are wonderful watching, and the art in them, the sound effects, the music, everything in them, the narration are sort of wonderfully done. They'll captivate your imagination and get you captivated, and it's wonderful watching. So go watch those right away. We'll have links to those as well. And timcast.com. Check that out as well. By the way, if you want to catch Shane on social media, on Facebook, it's Tales from the Inverted World. On Instagram and Twitter, it's Inverted Tales. Look for those handles there so you can see more that Shane has to offer you there as well. And sign up and become a member of Tales from the Inverted World at timcast.com. We encourage you to do that so you can get more of the wonderful programming that's over there. Shane Cashman, my guest. Shane, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight here on Darkness Radio.
Thank you so much. This is a real pleasure. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Shane. We appreciate you. Folks, I want to thank you so much for joining us here this week for another wonderful week of Darkness Radio. It's so much appreciated. I appreciate you guys for being here week after week and joining us here in the best in paranormal podcasting. As we come to a close today, I want to remind you to take care of yourself and each other, as I do every week. You know, the world is getting a little bit colder. I say that every week as well. It is true. We're for some reason becoming a little bit more polarized in our world. I don't know why that is. But let's try and bring the gap together a little bit. Let's help each other out a little bit. If you see somebody out there who needs a helping hand, just stop for 5 minutes. Ask them what they need. Help them out a little bit. If it's just a quick helping hand, help somebody out there in need. If it's an extra $5, maybe you've got an extra $5 that you can help somebody with. Just do a little something to help the world become a little bit brighter this weekend. And I know I'll do that as well. I'll be throwing in that extra hand as well this weekend if I can do so. Do that for your boy Timmy. Do that for your friends here at Darkness Radio if you need any other motivation other than that. And we'll do it together, and we'll help clean this place up a little bit and leave it better than we found it. It's a good goal to have for this weekend. I also want to thank our sponsors for this week, HelloFresh and Microdose Gummies. I want to thank them both sincerely for helping us out here on the show and keeping the show going. Folks, I also want to encourage you to visit our sponsors, take a look at what they have. They are both awesome sponsors, and they come out with such great products. And from the bottom of our heart, we want to just appreciate them for believing in us and backing us and keeping the show going. And we encourage you to take advantage of their specials, as they have great products, and we want you to take part in those products because we believe in them and we want you to try them as well. So take part of those specials that we have out there for you for HelloFresh and Microdose Gummies, and let them know that Darkness Radio is a great program and that you support them as well by trying their products. We've got great shows coming up for you next week. We encourage you to come on back next Tuesday for True Crime Tuesday, and come on back next week for the best in paranormal podcasting, Darkness Radio. Have a good weekend, everybody.